The sun rises over a quiet suburban street in Toronto. Honestly, it could be anywhere in North America. A yellow school bus, manufactured by Bluebird Corporation down in Georgia, rumbles past. Inside a home, a family starts its day. The coffee brewing is a popular Seattle-based brand. The kids pour themselves bowls of cereal from a box made in Battle Creek, Michigan. Their father scrolls through the morning news on a smartphone designed in Cupertino, California. This scene repeats itself in millions of Canadian households every single day. The rhythm of Canadian life has long been set to an American soundtrack. American products, American services, American media. This deep integration isn't just a coincidence, it's actually the result of decades of open borders and some pretty complex trade agreements. The United States-Canada-Mexico Agreement, or USMCA, its predecessor, NAFTA. The announcement came on a Monday morning. It was delivered not with fiery rhetoric but with the calm, measured tone you'd expect from a government briefing. Effective November 1st, 2025, Ottawa will impose significant restrictions. They're targeting a list of American goods. The policy is called the Canadian Economic Sovereignty Initiative. It isn't a blanket ban, it's a carefully curated firewall. Restricted categories: dairy, poultry, processed snacks. This isn't about closing the border, it's about recalibrating a relationship. Signaling the era of unquestioned American dominance may be ending. New restrictions on U.S. dairy products, cheese, yogurt, processed foods that fail stricter health standards, that will block many American snacks. Restrictions also hit non-essential consumer goods. AIM, create space for Canadian artisans, meant to be a shield and a statement. The Canadian government has laid out three main reasons for this bold policy shift. They're economic, cultural, and health-related. The top driver is economic. For years, Canadian manufacturers and farmers have warned they're being pushed right to the edge. They say they just can't compete with the massive scale and heavy subsidies of American agribusiness and industry. The government's move is a direct answer to these calls for help. The goal: level the playing field. The second pillar is cultural. There's a real fear in Canada that the country is losing its unique identity. Officials argue that the non-stop flood of American media and consumer goods creates a monoculture, crowding out Canadian voices, stories, and products. By giving more shelf space to Canadian-made goods, the government wants to build a stronger national identity. The third, and maybe most powerful reason, is public health. The Canadian Ministry of Health has put out data showing a strong link between the rise in certain U.S.-imported processed foods and worsening public health. They point to higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. To really get how big this decision is, you've got to look at the numbers. The economic relationship between the United States and Canada is actually the largest in the world. In 2024, two-way trade in goods and services went over $900 billion. The United States has a significant trade surplus with Canada in goods, exporting billions more than it imports. U.S. goods exports to Canada topped $350 billion last year alone. That makes Canada the #1 export market for the U.S., bigger than Mexico, China, even the whole European Union. The sheer size of this trade shows what's at stake for American businesses. About 75% of all Canada's imports come from the United States. In grocery stores, the numbers are even more dramatic. It's estimated that over 60% of all processed foods are from the U.S. Nearly half of all fresh produce sold in Canadian supermarkets are from the U.S. For some products, like winter strawberries, that number can get close to 90%. This kind of reliance creates some serious vulnerabilities. Any disruption, whether it's a policy change or a hiccup in the supply chain, hits Canadian store shelves and prices right away. So, the government's announcement has sent shockwaves across Canada, and honestly, the reactions are anything but uniform. Canadian consumers are, well, deeply divided. In online forums and on talk radio shows, a lot of folks are expressing anxiety and frustration. They're worried about rising prices and, reduced selection at the grocery store. One caller from Calgary told a national radio program, "I have a family of 4 to feed. I buy what's affordable. If this means my grocery bill goes up 20%, how is that helping me?" But on the other side of the debate, there is a surge of vocal support. Many Canadians are actually embracing the policy as a long overdue act of patriotism. The hashtag #BuyCanadian is trending on social media. Small business owners and local producers are celebrating the news as a potential lifeline. A statement from the Dairy Farmers of Canada praised the government for taking a stand to protect family farms. This group sees the restrictions not as a burden, but as an opportunity. Canadian business groups are also split. the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has offered cautious optimism, noting that the move could create significant opportunities for its members. However, larger business councils and import-export associations are sounding the alarm. They warn of retaliatory tariffs from the United States, which could devastate Canadian exporters. The CEO of a major Canadian auto parts manufacturer warned in a press release, "You cannot poke the bear and not expect it to poke back." This is a dangerous game that could cost thousands of Canadian jobs. This new trade conflict is not happening in a vacuum. The relationship between Canada and the United States has been punctuated by trade disputes for over a century. One of the most famous examples is the ongoing softwood lumber dispute. This conflict has simmered for decades, with the United States repeatedly imposing duties on Canadian lumber imports, claiming they are unfairly subsidized. Canada has consistently fought and often won these battles at international trade tribunals, but the issue remains a persistent thorn in the side of the relationship, costing Canadian producers billions over the years. More recently, the relationship was severely tested during the renegotiation of NAFTA under the Trump administration. The United States imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, citing national security concerns, a move that was widely seen in Canada as absurd and insulting. Canada retaliated with its own dollar-for-dollar tariffs on a range of American goods, whiskey, washing machines. That episode, though resolved with the signing of the USMCA, left a lasting scar. It reminded Canadians that their largest trading partner could at any moment become unpredictable and hostile, reinforcing the arguments of those who call for greater economic self-sufficiency. Economists and trade analysts are working overtime to dissect the implications of Canada's policy. Dr. Amara Singh, a trade expert at the University of Toronto, offered a cautious perspective in an interview with the CBC. "This is a high-stakes bet on economic nationalism," she stated. "The government is banking on a swift and successful scale-up of domestic production. If Canadian industries can't fill the gap left by United States imports quickly, the result will be shortages and significant inflation." News reports from the United States show a mix of surprise and anger. A senior United States trade official, quoted anonymously in the Wall Street Journal, called the Canadian move a slap in the face and a clear violation of both the letter and the spirit of the USMCA. The official warned, all options are on the table for a swift and robust response. This confirms fears in Canada that retaliation is not a matter of if, but when. Experts predict the United States will likely target key Canadian exports, automotive parts, beef oil, to inflict maximum political and economic pain on Ottawa. Dr. Mark Finley, a geopolitical analyst at the Montreal Economic Institute, sees this as part of a broader global trend. "We are seeing a global retreat from the hyper-globalization of the late 20th century," he wrote. "Nations are increasingly prioritizing supply chain security, domestic production, and national interests over the efficiencies of free trade." Canada's move, while disruptive, is consistent with actions we've seen from Europe and other Asian countries. The reaction to the new trade policy reveals a significant divide between Canada's urban centers and its rural communities. In major cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, the response has been mixed, but a strong current of concern is palpable. Urban dwellers are often more exposed to global supply chains and have grown accustomed to a wide variety of international products. For many city residents, especially younger generations, the idea of hash by Canadian is a nice sentiment, but the reality of higher prices and fewer choices at their local grocery store or favorite boutique is a more immediate worry. In contrast, the support in many rural and agricultural regions is nearly unanimous and deeply passionate. For these communities, this is not an abstract economic theory, it is about survival.
For 20 years, we've been told to just be more efficient, to compete with giants.
Now, finally, we have a government that understands you can't win a fight with one hand tied behind your back. In small towns across the prairies and the Maritimes, where a single factory or processing plant can be the largest employer, the policy is seen as a lifeline. Canada's decision to restrict certain American goods marks a pivotal moment in the history of North American trade. It is a bold, calculated move born from a potent mix of economic anxiety, cultural preservationism, and public health concerns. For decades, the flow of American products into Canadian life was as steady and predictable as the tides. That era of open-door policy has now come to a definitive end. The Canadian government is attempting to reassert its sovereignty, betting that the long-term health of its domestic industries and national identity is worth the risk of a short-term economic battle with its closest ally and largest trading partner. Economically, it is a direct response to years of pressure on Canadian farmers and manufacturers. Culturally, it is an attempt to push back against the tide of American influence, and from a public health perspective, it is a move to enforce stricter standards on processed foods. These powerful arguments have created a divided but passionate response across the nation, exposing a deep fault line between urban and rural interests. The path forward is fraught with uncertainty. The immediate future will likely be defined by the American response. Retaliatory tariffs seem almost inevitable, which could harm Canadian exporters and escalate the conflict. This could lead to a painful period of adjustment for Canadian consumers, who may face higher prices and fewer choices on store shelves. The key question is whether Canadian producers can ramp up production quickly enough to fill the void and stabilize the market. Expert opinion suggests a full-blown trade war is unlikely, with diplomacy and negotiation expected to eventually de-escalate the situation, but not before significant economic disruption occurs. Ultimately, this policy represents a fundamental reimagining of the Canada-United States relationship. It challenges the long-held assumption that deeper economic integration is always the goal. Canada has signaled that it is willing to sacrifice some of the efficiencies of free trade in exchange for greater control over its own destiny. The coming months will test the resolve of both nations. Whether this move leads to a stronger, more self-sufficient Canada, or a damaging and protracted trade dispute remains to be seen. What is certain is that the world's longest undefended border now has a new and very significant economic barrier.